Thank you. This has been kind of fun, hasn't it? Listening to all about risk. I am presenting today with wearing multiple hats, and I want to kind of clearly outline that. I am presenting as a Tanner employee. I oversee the cybersecurity division at Tanner LLC. I also am the mayor of the city of Fruit Heights. I am the chairman for the Davis County COG. I sit on the Wasatch Integrated Waste Executive Committee. So I think my perspective and what I'm trying to go after is I understand where we're coming from. I have no desire today to stand up here and throw out a whole bunch of FUD, fear, uncertainty, and doubt, and just scare the snot out of you guys about cybersecurity. That's not my desire. Today, actually, is like the first time ever that I can present something good that's been going on with cybersecurity. I appreciate this opportunity to present with all of you. I would love for this to be a little more interactive. Last year I gave a presentation and it was legitimately terrible. It was completely remote. I was sitting in my office, everyone was muted. I asked questions and it's just like dead silence. And I would ask and legitimately hope and pray that this meeting does not turn out the same because it was horrible. Mouth was dry after that thing. Anyway, so if there's any questions, please raise your hand. I would love to address your concerns and your questions right when they come. Today, I want to talk about something good that's happened in the state of Utah. Last year, in the 2021 legislative session, our legislators passed a bill which was known as House Bill 80, or the Cybersecurity Affirmative Defense Act. I am going to spend the next 30 or 40 minutes talking about that and explaining very clearly how you can comply with this House bill so that you can receive that affirmative defense that the state is offering to all organizations in the state of Utah that have personal information. I understand a lot of municipalities, like the city of Fruit Heights, a lot of our information is public. But what we don't think about is our employees' information. We don't think about if, planning and zoning servers get encrypted, the catastrophic effect that would cause. So I want to kind of take it holistically that all of us have personal information. All of us have information that we don't want to get leaked out. I get that, but I hope after this meeting today, you will understand that there is a very clear step forward on how to comply with this House bill and receive this legitimately very cost-effective affirmative defense. Does that make sense? Okay. Houston, we have a problem. How do we advance the slides, my friend?
Usually I hit the TV and
just go after it. All right. So the objective of this, and I understand that I am standing between lunch, and that's like the worst time. I wish I had Gary's spot so I can just like ramble on about canyoneering for like half an hour. That'd be way fun. I can tease Gary because he's actually a really good friend, and I asked him beforehand if I could talk about him and his environment. We worked with him last year and did some work with their firm, so with his city. So I'm going to tease him quite a bit just because he's before me and his was way more enjoyable than talking about cybersecurity, except they're talking about canyoneering. Anyway, the objective of this presentation is just to give a quick overview of what's going on. Talk about the Cybersecurity Act. I want to spend most of the time talking about HB 80. I think there's a lot of value in this. I feel personally that our legislators finally did something right. We're going to talk about some of the frameworks you can follow, and then how do you make this work? How do you make this stick? So first off, privacy law right now is terrible. I'm going to re-emphasize, it is awful. If you look at the CCPA that was passed just about 3 years ago, the California Consumer Protection Act that was enacted, it is legitimately one of the worst pieces of legislation I've ever seen. This was the brainchild of one individual that pushed this through within a matter of less than a week, and he got it approved and it passed. The CCPA, and I'm also going to throw in the GDPR, or the European law. what they're doing is they're out there with clubs and sticks smashing people who are not complying. They're beating people. They're levying fines, penalties, fees if you're not found to comply with their framework. Unfortunately, the framework that they chose does not fit all. It's not a one-size-fits-all glove. So if you're not a Fortune 100 company and you dedicate millions of dollars to comply with this, the government can come after you and impose levies and fines and penalize you if you're not found compliant. That's terrible legislation. Following that, we have the Nevada with their Senate Bill 220, Virginia, their Senate Bill 1392. They're all following suit with California. So it's creating a race to the bottom of who can create the worst legislation and pass it. And what this does is an organization, let's say, I understand all of you are municipalities, but if you have a contractor that works or has a residence in California and you are paying them, just because you have one contractor that you pay one invoice to makes you comply with the CCPA. It's absurd. And then if you have contractors from Nevada, Virginia, I think North Carolina, if you have contractors or employees or anything that you have to pay invoices to any of those locations, it forces you to comply with every single one of those jurisdictions. And if you can imagine the private industry right now, they have online sales. If you sell one thing to California, it requires your entire organization to comply with the CCPA or any of these other states. So right now what we have is we have 50 different states setting up their own different requirements. It's awful. Like, I legitimately can't think of a worse environment for cybersecurity. There's no guidance on how to comply with all of them. All of them are set them up differently, so you have to comply with all of them individually. And then this is terrible. That you have organizations, cities, municipalities, special service districts that are investing in cybersecurity, but they receive no benefit from it. The amount that you invest in it is pretty much just seen as a sunk cost because there's no benefit to it. Because if you get breached and you found that you did not comply with every single line item in these legislations, you get fined, you get penalized, and lawsuits can come right after that. So I'm not trying to paint this doom and gloom situation. I really am not. Like, I have like good news for you. But this is like the environment that we live in right now. And it's only going to get worse. And I'm going to say that thankfully, the state of Utah did something differently. House Bill 80, they did everything that CCPA did, but they did it exactly backwards. What they did, and I love the state of Utah, we live in a great state, I'll be honest. Instead of penalizing everyone who doesn't comply, what the state of Utah did is they're going to incentivize people. They're going to incentivize organizations, municipalities, special service districts, that if they are found to invest into cybersecurity, they will provide an affirmative defense, which means I'm going to use the word safe harbor. It's not a safe harbor. It is affirmative defense, but a safe harbor that if there's a breach of security systems, is the exact wording in that law, breach of security systems, any lawsuits that follow that breach would get thrown out in court. So let me reiterate that. So if you are found to comply with HB 80, the state of Utah will provide this affirmative defense to you that if there's ever a breach of security systems, if any data is leaked or compromised, and there is a lawsuit that follows that breach, they will throw all those lawsuits out in court. So finally, we have a state of Utah, that's pushing this initiative to say, no, we want everyone to invest in cybersecurity. So then it comes, how do you comply? Actually, let me hit on this real quick. There's 3 affirmative defenses. I'm only going to target the top one. There's affirmative defense against a claim that an organization failed to imply reasonable controls. They are not saying that you have to have 100% all controls in place. All they're saying is that you have to provide reasonable controls. So you don't need to be like Adobe. You don't have to have the controls that Adobe has. You just have to have reasonable ones in place. There's 2 others. I don't have the time to talk about those today, but there's a defense against failure to respond to a breach, and then also there's an affirmative defense against failure to appropriately notify individuals. The first one is the biggest. We could spend the rest of the time talking about it. I'm going to spend maybe about 20 minutes talking a little bit more. How do you comply with this? And then I'd love to answer any questions that you might have. So the requirements of this bill, it's actually not that daunting. I don't want you to feel like, oh no, this is terrible. Even a crummy city like Bountiful can comply. Sorry, I told you I was going to throw in last. But what are the requirements? First, you need to perform a risk assessment. I'm going to take a step back. I'm going to put on my mayoral hat real quick. I don't know anything that's going on in my IT department. I don't. A risk assessment is going to be a procedure, an event that will identify all the risks in IT. If you go down and talk to those guys, they're usually in the basement. They usually don't have any lights or windows in their office. They usually don't have the best hygiene for some reason. You go and ask them what the problems are, they'll say nothing. It's great, we have the best environment ever. But what this bill is requiring is that you perform a risk assessment, which is, we'll get into it, but you have to perform a risk assessment against a nationally recognized framework. Don't get scared. The legislators actually did another thing that was brilliant to make it so that all of us can comply. But you have to have a risk assessment performed on a regular basis. Second, you need to create a written cybersecurity program. The word program is like, oh no, this huge investment into a program. No, all it is a written policy as to what's going on in your cybersecurity infrastructure. What are you doing in IT? Write some IT security policies. Write a policy that says if Joe Bozo clicks on a bad link or visits a bad website, that there's a chance that he will get terminated. Write that. Tell your employees that if they do something bad, there will be consequences to it. Unfortunately, that's a pretty big ask. A lot of municipalities don't have things written. It's just assumed. So second, create a written cybersecurity policy. Third, make sure the controls are in place before a breach. I think that's pretty obvious. Put the controls in place before there's a breach. Fourth, general requirements. Protect the security, confidentiality, integrity of the personal information. So do your best to protect personal information. Personal information is a name, an address, it could be a name, social security number, name, driver's license number. Most of you who have police departments, fire departments, you have a lot of private information. You'd have classified HIPAA information. Do your best to control and make sure that you protect the confidentiality, the integrity, and the availability of that data. Protect against anticipated threats or hazards. Again, these are very generalized. I want to point this out that our legislators did this on purpose so that they're not requiring everyone to be like Facebook or Adobe or big massive organization who can spend thousands and hundreds of thousands of dollars in IT. They're making these very generalized, and they're saying fit it to your organization. Third, protect against a breach of security systems. Do your best to protect against it. If you are found, what they're trying to do is to take out the negligence clause in a lawsuit. Do your best. And then lastly, you have to follow specific frameworks, conform to one of the nationally recognized frameworks. I will get into the frameworks and I'll tell you how awesome it is that our legislators listen to feedback. The next one is make sure that the scale and the scope meet the size of your organization. Okay. A city of the size of Fruit Heights, we have 4 full-time office staff. It is different than the size of Bountiful City. Bountiful City has, what do you have, Gary? 200 office staff. City of Fruit Heights has 4. Okay. The scale and scope is going to be dramatically different between those two organizations. Bountiful City has a lot more controls they have to put in place. City of Fruit Heights does not, because we don't have that big of an environment. And then reasonable requirements. Develop policies, procedures, Policies, practices, and procedures to detect, prevent, and respond to a breach. Perform risk assessments on a regular basis. There's a clause here, and I want to take a step back and just kind of clarify this real quick. The defense does not apply if an organization has actual notice of a threat or a hazard, failure to act, and the hazard results in a breach. Let me pause that real quick. So if you are notified that you don't have the controls in place to mitigate an attack, that affirmative defense would be wiped out. But an actual notice is not something you're going to see very often. A risk assessment, a risk assessment that you perform does not classify as an actual notice, okay? So even if a third party comes in and we do a risk assessment on your organization and we provide you with the report and here's a list of things that need to be mitigated, that is not an actual notice. An actual notice would be a hardware vendor, like your firewall, says, hey, there's an important update that needs to be run on your firewall. Run this update as soon as you can. Another actual notice would be your servers that you're running. You've been notified by Microsoft that the version of Microsoft that you're running is out of date and is not supported anymore. Those are two very clear actual notices. Does that make sense? The difference between performing a risk assessment, identifying your own risks, or receiving an actual notice from a service provider that you have. Question in the back. Actual notices? So those online, the question was, they have received water district, I'm assuming, or is it sewer, has received notifications from the federal government about specific threats to the environment. Those would be classified as an actual notice. Yes, they would be. What they're telling you to do, are you running SCADA systems? Yes. So there's a few things with SCADA systems. SCADA system is, I'm going to use the word legacy. It's been around for a long time. It's older. Something that's been around for a long time normally has a lot of updates and a lot of patches that need to be put in place to make sure that it's to the latest and greatest. Let's take SCADA for example. Let's take Microsoft. Microsoft's even easier for everyone to understand. Microsoft sends out these, they sell Office 365. They spend millions of dollars every year identifying vulnerabilities in their system. They have an entire development department that's back there fixing all of the issues. The second Tuesday of every month is Patch Tuesday. They send out all the patches for all of Microsoft systems. Very clearly known. What they're doing is they're seeing that, hey, this hacker was able to get in through this port, or they're able to do this command that circumvented our security systems. They're patching those on a very regular basis. SCADA is doing the exact same thing. They want to do all they can to protect the information of the users that are using it. There are patches, there's updates on those systems that need to be run on a very regular basis. We have received and we have seen that cyber warfare between nation states has picked up dramatically in the last month and a half. We have seen in the news that Russia is coming after us. And you better believe it, we have seen it. They're coming after energy, they're coming after water, and they're coming after the special service districts infrastructure. Normally, sewer, water, not necessarily power, they don't have the infrastructure, they don't have the IT know-how, they don't have a dedicated IT team. They're usually just pulled into another group. They're really good at managing water, they're really good at managing sewer, but they're not very good at managing IT systems. Nation states know that, and they know they can cripple us if they are able to get in. We have worked with 2 water districts in the past few years who their systems have been breached. One has been very public, very open here in the state, has talked on numerous occasions about what happened and how to prevent it, and how one of the individuals was just happened to sitting there watching as someone was in their systems. I'm just going to state the fact that it's a real concern. It's a real issue. And to make sure that you do all you can to patch and update and do your best with your systems. The best way to understand what risks you have is to perform a risk assessment on your infrastructure. Yes, second question.
My follow-up question is, what I'm trying to do that is, you're not being specific, you're saying the same.
So are they telling you specifically what needs to be patched?
They're not. They're just saying,
okay. So
what I'm saying is, arrested.
Okay. So they have not been specific on what the. Okay, let me take an example. Equifax, they were notified by the federal government 2.5 weeks before the breach occurred. The systems that were running were out of date and not patched. I was assuming that was the notification that you're using, that they were sending. So if they're just sending blanketed, hey, be aware, there's going to be some issues with your systems. If they're telling you something very specifically, I would tell you to do what they're doing. But if it's just a blanketed, that would not be classified as an actual notice. Moving on. Oh, and then the last note, a risk assessment to improve security is not actual notice of a threat or a hazard. Does that make sense? So anything that you're doing to identify threats or hazards on your system is not classified as an actual notice. Okay, does that make sense? Now this is the fun part. That is like really scary, isn't it? But this is actually proof that our legislators listen. That list right there is fantastic. So when this bill was originally written, there's only 2 things on this list: ISO 27001 and FedRAMP. Do you know how challenging it is for a municipality or a special service district to become ISO 27001 certified? You're looking minimally at about $100,000 investment. So our state legislators put this House bill together and they're like, hey, this is great. Anyone who's 27001 certified or FedRAMP certified, we'll provide this affirmative defense to them. But what they missed out on when they first wrote it was, wait a second, small municipalities can't do that. Sewer districts, they can't be 27001 certified. Like, they don't have the funds for it. Legislators listened and they expanded this list. They expanded it to include 2 requirements that are the best 2 ever. NIST 800-171 or NIST 171 or NCIS 20. Those are 2 frameworks that just about everyone can comply with. They're very, very, very simple. It's a very low barrier to entry to be able to comply with those frameworks. The frameworks are very widely accepted. They're very widely known. IT individuals, most everything is tied to NIST. Actually, to be honest with you, HIPAA is tied to NIST. PCI is tied to NIST. Everything is tied to NIST. NIST is the National Institute of Standards and Technology. So they've come out and said, this is the standards that your IT should be in. The best thing about this bill is that you don't have to be 100% compliant. What you have to do is you have to show that you're not negligent and that you're moving towards compliance. So an organization that may not be there today, may not have all the controls in place, but they've identified them and they have a plan moving forward. That is what the state of Utah wants to see. That is what our legislators want to see. That is what is going to provide organizations, cities, municipalities, special service districts with that affirmative defense. Does that make sense? Our legislators did it right. I have a partner, I have a really good friend that was a part of this. We, as our team, as our organization, helped in drafting this bill. When we saw this and we're like, no, not just ISO, like terrible. And they were actually able to listen. And when this went through, it went through virtually unanimously and was signed into law and effective last year, in March of last year. They threw in the NIST 171. That's great. How do you make the defense stick? This one is, I'm going to say it's mostly for private industry. I'm going to talk just 2 minutes about it just so you understand what's there. But in order for this law, this bill, this affirmative defense to be effective, you need to make sure that all of your legal claims have a statute that they will proceed here in the state of Utah. If you have an organization like Adobe, for example, and in all of your partner agreements, they say that if there's ever a breach of security systems, you have to use Utah law. It's a very small clause that you just need to put into your partnership agreements. Any agreements you have with employees, partners, contractors, just very clearly state the fact that if there's ever a concern that we will utilize Utah law. Does that make sense? Yeah. Question, yes. Way easier said than done. I flew over it in like 2.5 minutes because it's super easy to say that. The reality of that is it's very challenging. But I'm going to say, as a special service district, your agreements should be written and just reviewed by your legal department, saying we want Utah law to circumvent any other law. If you already have agreements in place with partners, with subcontractors or contractors that are out of state, verify that your agreement with them in the next year or so gets rewritten to incorporate Utah law as a law of jurisdiction. Does that make sense? I know that's super simplified. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not providing legal advice, but I think lawyers like to bill, and I think they like to collect as much money as they can, and they're more than willing to help you with that. Okay, at this point, I want to take a couple minutes. I know I've got maybe 10 minutes. I want to get out and catch it back up so that we're back on time so that we can have lunch. I just want to spend a few minutes of talking about the good things that we have seen. I talked about working with Gary and the city of Bountiful. We went in and did a risk assessment for them. I will tell you very clearly, it was not clean. They had a lot of issues. But what was awesome was sitting down with Gary, sitting down with Alan, his IT director, and putting a map and a plan in place, getting it in place. Helping I'm actually going to throw Gary under the bus, helping Gary understand that they needed some funding to satisfy a couple small issues that they were having. They needed a part-time person to do some things that they weren't doing very well. These risk assessments aren't very expensive. The value that you're going to get from it is going to be a very clear road map on how to proceed forward. And then once you do it, whether you do it internally, whether you do it externally, you should have a map, and it should be very clearly said, we are not effectively doing vulnerability management, for example. We're not identifying what vulnerabilities are on our systems on a regular basis, which would be a monthly basis. Okay, well, that's not very hard to do. You assign it to an IT individual, you assign it to a contractor, say, I want to report every month of our vulnerabilities on our systems, and then just patch them. So that if there's a critical issue on your systems one month, I don't want to see it there next month. Go ahead, Gary. Yes, and I'll actually throw out one more. There was a little bit of we identified a little bit of turf wars within not necessarily one city, but within a few cities where you have a department, let's say police, and they have their own internal IT person, and then you have the city's IT department, and they were fighting, and they're a little bickering and arguing back and forth. It was very clear from the third party perspective. We can put that in the report. Whether it's power, whether it's police, whether it's fire, they were not getting along. And because they weren't getting along, they were causing big issues in the infrastructure as a whole. And to identify that, hey, this organization, this subgroup is not working with IT, actually causes much more risk than if you can just get them to work together. that was one thing that was very easy to identify from a third party, and it was helpful for in a report to kind of bubble that up to the surface and say, here's a couple issues, and kind of one of them is political. These organizations are fighting against each other and trying to outdo each other and step on and sabotage each other. Well, there's no benefit to that. Let's work together. So anyway, do we have any questions? I'd like to spend, yes, go ahead. So the question is, what's the best thing you can do to prevent and respond to a ransomware attack? First and foremost, NIST 171 very clearly states that you need to have offsite backup. Offsite backup means that it is not on your network. If a ransomware attack comes on your network, you can count on all your backups being encrypted. They'll be worthless. You need to have offsite backup. Second thing you need to do, you actually need to test your backups. There's no worse time to test a backup than when you need it most. You don't need to do it every week. You don't need to do it every month. Do it quarterly. Do it biannually. But just test your backups, making sure that, hey, Friday at 2 o'clock, we're going to close everything. Our IT is going to stop what we're doing, and we're going to pretend like we had a ransomware. Do a tabletop experience. Maybe you don't tell them and just say, okay, we're going to call IT in on Friday. We're going to say, we had a ransomware attack. Restore from backups. We want to see how long it will take. We want to see the RPO or the RTO, the recovery point objective, the recovery time objective. Let's say reasonably it takes 3 days to get back up. Okay, we want to see that. We want to see what will happen. How to prevent it? You need to train your people just slightly. We have really, the culture here in Utah is that we want to be helpful. We want to be accommodating. We want to be amicable. We want to help everyone. The problem is when we get an email and you have sweet little secretary that is just trying to help everyone, and there's an email that comes across as urgent, hey, I need you to look at this planning commission agenda, whatever it might be. Look at this plan, now hurry, I need you to verify this. Click on it, boom, system's getting encrypted. If you're getting emails like that, you just need to train a little bit. I'm not saying you need to invest in really, really expensive training tools and stuff like that, but you need your employees to know. Great question. Thank you online, whoever asked that. Question in the back.
How often do you organizations should do those phishing tests?
Great. Question was, how long do I feel that organizations should do phishing and penetration tests? Okay, that's a really good question. And the House Bill 80 actually outlines it fairly well. They say on a regular basis. Which I actually think that it's written that way, and I love the way that it's written, because that's not saying that the city of Fruit Heights with 4 employees needs to do it at the same cadence as Bountiful City that has 200 employees. I would tell you very honestly, a risk assessment should be performed on an annual basis. That's a risk assessment. And what the reason for that is management, executive level management should know what the risks are and what the plan is for that year moving forward. I'm not saying that needs to be done from a third party every year. All I'm saying is it needs to be performed. The challenge that you face is that your IT team, love them, hygiene is terrible, but what happens is they are making a lot of critical decisions that they should not be making alone. Let's take, for example, we just talked about backup and disaster recovery. They are trying to save as much money as they can, and so their RPO, their recovery point objective, is actually a month out. And they could have spent $1,000 more a year to get an RPO of a week, but they were trying to save as much money as they can for the city or for the municipality. Those decisions should not be made in IT. Those decisions should be made in the executive level. They should be part of the executive team. If Gary understood that, hey, for $1,000 more a year, we can get an RPO of 3 days, well, that's a no-brainer. But IT, they're really cost conscious. They're really good. They're awesome like that. Going to training and pen testing. I would tell you to never get pen tested. Don't do a pen test. Don't ever do a penetration test. The value for your organizations, for a municipality, water district, sewer district, fire district, you don't need a pen test. Those are very expensive and they don't provide you the value what you're looking for. I would tell you to do a vulnerability assessment. A vulnerability assessment is an automated tool that will go through and scan your whole system. And it will tell you every issue. Every pen test starts with a vulnerability assessment, but then the pen test goes into manually testing and exfiltrating data. The value of doing a pen test compared to vulnerability assessment is not there for you guys. The only reason you should do a pen test is if you're required to do that for compliance purposes. Let's say you needed, for if you wrote your own in-house software, that should be pen tested. So I would say never, but you should probably do a vulnerability assessment on a very regular basis. I would say probably a monthly basis. They're very inexpensive. You know, for let's say $2,500 a year, you can have them done on a monthly basis and have a report sent to you. So it's pretty cost effective. A penetration test is probably going to start around $6,000 and go up to maybe $10,000 to $12,000. Okay. How often should they be fished? I would say no more often than quarterly. Quarterly is kind of the sweet spot that we've seen. IT can send out these phishing emails. If you're doing them on, if you have 4 users, like the city of Drew Heights, you can't do them more than annually. You know, hey, by the way, we're getting phished right now. Look at this email. Ah, this is funny. And everyone's sitting in the same room. There's no value to that. Can I take 30 seconds to tell a funny story? We were doing a phishing campaign for, it's actually the Insurance Guarantee Association in Missouri. There's 4 people in the office. 2 of them were in our meeting and knew that we were going to do a phishing phishing test on their organization. So we were testing in essence 2 people. Of the 4 people, 2 people failed. The 2 people that knew we were going to do it. Sorry. Go ahead. Question. Yep. CIS. So CIS V8. So CIS has changed its names like quite a bit recently, but it's just the CIS controls. CIS V8 is CIS version 8. CIS top 20, CIS, CIS. I put it as top 20. Most people don't recognize it as version 8. Pretty funny. In the last like 4 years, it's gone through 8 versions. But yeah, CIS. That's it. Do that. Any other questions? Yes, Richard.
You can work with them to try to penetrate this data system, see what they see.
Great. So the question was, what do I think about Homeland Security doing a pen test on our SCADA system? Homeland Security actually does it I think at no cost, correct? Yeah, do that. If you can get a free pen test, do it. But if you're not getting a free pen test, don't do it. Do a vulnerability assessment. We could do a vulnerability assessment on your, let me just give you a very quick example. A pen test is going to see if an intruder can get in, yes, no. It's a dichotomy, either yes or no. All they need to do is get into one place. If they can find one entrance point, you failed. What they're not doing is they're not testing everything. The vulnerability assessment is testing everything and saying, this one is a high probability they could get in. This one's pretty high. This one, it's going to take a little work, but they could get in. This one, it's going to take quite a bit of work. This one, oh, we have to get a keylogger on someone's. Anyway, it's going to tell you all of the ways that someone could get in and the ways they could get in. But they're not going to take the time to take the next step and actually do the exfiltration. Pen test, if they get in once, you fail, and that's it. You don't see all the other ways they could get in. My guess is Homeland Security, sorry, I'm not being cynical, but my guess is they're actually running a vulnerability assessment against your system, and they're just sending that report. A lot of people in the industry call vulnerability assessment a pen test. It's not, but they do. Whatever. Great question, but do it. Yes.
Those things don't have an internal IT department, but they can solve the.
Yep.
All this still applies, just work closely with them to get these reports.
Great question. So a municipality that uses an outside IT source, how does this comply? It's the exact same. So outsource IT, it's a smart function. You can save a lot of money doing that as a municipality, because an outsource IT company can service 4, 5, 6, 8 different municipalities, and they see all the different issues that's going on. They can clean it up. I like outsource IT companies. As an organization, as an IT auditor, it's actually really fun to go and audit those guys, because they tell you they're doing this, but in reality, they might be doing this. And it's actually really eye-opening for you. In-house IT, normally they have a pretty good pulse. We're actually right around here, and we'll go and audit them. Yeah, they're pretty close to what they're saying. Outsource IT, they want your monthly revenue, so they're gonna pitch in the moon to you. Oh yeah, we're doing this, we're doing everything. So an audit is actually very effective with them, to go in and have an IT audit performed. We work with a lot of them. They know what we do. We try to not make them look totally incompetent, but it's a really good exercise. It's a really good situation for you. Good question. Any other questions? Yes, online. I like online. Thanks, guys. Tabletop exercises. Again, that is going to be, again, this bill like outlines it perfectly, on a regular basis. It depends on the size of the organization. If the organization is 4 employees, a tabletop exercise every year is overkill. If you have 200 employees, you might want to do that on an annual, maybe on a biannual basis. It really just depends on what you're doing. Is you're in essence, you're springing an emergency on your IT team. You're pulling whatever they're working on that day, and you're saying, get into this conference room. We had a tabletop experience. It's good to have legal in there. It's good to have your city manager in there. It's good to have IT in there. It's good to get everyone on the same page, review policies together. Hey, we had an employee that did X, Y, and Z. What are our next steps? Those are extremely effective to know how to act before you actually need to act. So I would say on a regular basis, and they're pretty, if you're doing it on an annual basis, that's really, really, really effective. And you're just focusing on different things throughout the different tabletops. Great question. Thank you, online. Any other questions? Man, he scratched his head and I thought he was like calm on him. Okay, so again, I just want to recap. The state of Utah is awesome. They did something really cool last legislative session. We have Virginia that's following suit after Utah. We have two other states this year that are debating and looking to pass very similar legislation to what Utah did. I am proud to live in the state of Utah because we think differently. We are bees. We legitimately try to think of things the best way we can. I am super pleased that we did not follow suit in California. We as people work more effectively when we are incentivized with a carrot rather than beat with a stick. And as municipalities, I think it's the most effective way to provide an incentive to each organization to invest a little bit into cybersecurity. Understand what your risks are. I will tell you as a person, personally, I want to know that if I'm investing $10,000 into IT and cybersecurity, I want to know exactly the percentage of my risk that's going to be decreased by this investment. Otherwise, if you are putting $10,000 into cybersecurity and you don't know the risk that it's mitigating, you're not just throwing it against the wall and hoping some of it sticks. There are some really, really slimy or effective salespeople out there that will sell you the shiniest little tool that will tell you that it's going to stop everything. Let me be honest with you, it doesn't work. There is nothing out there on the market that can stop everything. And they are really good at selling. And I see a lot of people buying them like, no, like you're investing on something that's like a medium to low risk, and you have all of this that needs to be invested in before you invest in that. Understand, prioritize your risk. It is very effective for all people in an organization to understand IT risk. Second of all, if you're already understanding what your IT risk is, the ability to comply with HB80 is the smallest step forward. If you're just doing one more small step of making sure that you comply with a framework, utilizing a framework to comply with that. can't speak enough that Utah did a great job last year in passing that bill. I'm going to stick around. If anyone has any questions, you can come up. But I hope that all of you understand that we live in a great state and we have opportunity to get against breach that might maybe someday could occur to our IT systems. Thank you so much.